To a late episode of R-Rated Christianity. Sorry for the late start. We'll talk about that in a second. This is R-Rated Christianity. It's an apologetics podcast. It comes from the Greek word apologia, to give an answer or defense. An answer or defense. Not that God needs us to defend him or answer for him, but we're going to give a defense of why we believe the Christian worldview is logically consistent and authoritative. The Bible is authoritative, and you can depend on that. The R stands for real, raw, and redemptive. We have real conversations, as we just had one, in a raw way. And hopefully it leads to a very redemptive relationship with a first century Jew named Jesus Christ. And then when you have that relationship, that renewed relationship with Christ, then as the shirt says, everything changes. You cannot have that interaction with Christ and things not change if it's genuine. So we started late today. We're in this election season. We talked about voting and elections and politics last week. We're gonna look. This is reality. The church should be addressing politics. Polity and politico, the way we define it, as a set of ideas advocated by a group of people to affect the lives of others. And the Matthew 28:19 is a political statement. It's not a partisan statement. It's a political statement. And so we should be doing that. Set a group of people, Christians, set of ideas, biblical ideas, advocated by a group of people, Christians, to affect the lives of others, evangelize and try to change people and bring people to Jesus and teach them to obey all that I've commanded, Matthew 28:19. That's what we should be doing. So we should be political. You can argue whether it should be partisan is another, because there's no Republicans and Democrats in the Bible. There's just Christians and non-Christians and Herodians and Sadducees and Pharisees, and there's all kinds of political groups that Christians and Jesus had to navigate through, and we should do the same thing. Ultimately, we're trying to draw people to Christ and convince them, persuade them that doing life Christ's way is going to benefit them and it's going to honor God, and then, of course, blesses ourselves for doing that. So that being said, we started late because I'm just going to tell you, I'm just irritated all hell at the debate. We'll talk about that on another show, and so we're just pissed off at the way it went on. I mean, we're just arguing, talking back and forth, just hashing it all out.
Iron sharpening iron.
Well, but
we're both pissed about the way
yes, it was just irritating. It was irritating.
Irritated about the whole
so that's probably a sidebar conversation versus an R-rated conversation.
Literally.
But it was irritating. But there's a lot of political issues, and so you can look at that debate. Yeah. Because there's been debates before the debate. The society's been debating ideas leading up to politics. And these are important debates, and they have to happen because debates are there to persuade people. It's to sway your vote. And your vote is what you're trying to put your ideas into play. We always say that you're not voting for a candidate. You're really voting for a set of ideas that are advocated by a candidate. If you like the candidate, it's extra. In my opinion, someone that's been in politics. But you're really voting for their ideas. What set of ideas do you want to govern your society? For me, I want biblical ideas. Because I'm a Christian. I'm a Christ follower. Whether it's a Republican or Democrat, if they're on with the Bible, I'm on with them. And that's it. Period. End of story. The Islamic person will vote their ideas into office. The Hindu will vote his or her. The atheist will vote his or her. The agnostic or the whatever, you're going to vote their ideas because they want them to play out in their society and affect the lives of others. And so Christians should be no different. I think we've been tricked into staying in the corner like a redheaded stepchild and don't talk and keep your mouth shut and all this other bullshit, to be honest with you. And that's just not biblical. That's not Bible. That's not what God expects of us. We're called to be ambassadors for Christ, 2 Corinthians 5, meaning represent heaven on earth. This is our foreign land. And so doing that, we should be advocating his ideas, not being ashamed of them. And so this political season is going to bring that out. One of the issues that we're going to talk about that it was a debate issue. That's why we were talking about the debate and it got into issues, and we were just venting on. I just think Trump did horrible, but that's another story, and we'll talk about that on Saturday.
He did,
and it just sucked.
He did.
But I mean, that's here nor there. So we'll hash that out even more on Saturday. But one of the issues, and it's one that Republicans or really Christians need to deal with better, is abortion. And so we're like, okay, where does God stand on this? They get people that are pro-life, quote unquote, get uncomfortable many times, and they can't answer the question, and they don't understand. And when it comes to rape and incest and what happens, the life of the mom, and is there any exceptions? And there's this ban and that ban, and what does it mean? And then there's an argument that can be made because one of the candidates Harris made it, that you can still have a closely held faith and then be pro-choice. Yeah. Let's dissect that. For the Christian, I mean, so we're talking to, if you're not Christian, welcome. I hope you're listening. I think it's great. But for the Christian, where should we stand that honors God? Because here's the bottom line. I mean, I had the pleasure of speaking at a school today, and we're all going to have to give an answer. I mean, Scripture's clear. That's not a threat. That's not doom and gloom. I had to answer to my parents when I was younger. My kids have to answer to me. We all have to answer. Everyone's going to have to answer. And so we all agree that we're leaving this earth. I'm fully persuaded that the God of the Bible is the one I'm going to stand before. Amen. And then he's going to have my resume on how I stood for him, how obedient, how much I sacrificed for him. His love language, as we always say, as I say, is obedience and sacrifice. And so were we obedient to him? And not just obedient in checking off boxes. The religious people do that, Pharisees, you check off the boxes by your behavior out of gratitude and overflowing with gratitude. It kind of naturally checks off boxes. You don't think you're checking off a box. You're just living in obedience and gratitude, and then the boxes get checked by default. That's the way I like to look at it, because then it takes away the oh shit, did I check off my box? Well, of course you checked off your box if you're being obedient to Christ. Yeah. It happened naturally. And so one of those issues is abortion. And so the claim, because I know a lot of people that are pro-choice have the claim that you can still be, hold deeply to your rooted beliefs, and they're talking about Christian beliefs, and still be pro-choice. And so we thought that we would dissect that a little bit, even though we started late thanks to Jeff. We can dissect that, and we're going to go through Bible. We'll go through ideas. We'll answer questions if somebody has comments or questions, and push and press and this. So I don't know where you want to start, George. I mean, I kind of took a long time to open up.
I pulled up her quote to make sure we were getting it right on that issue. Quote, during the debate, she says, one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. So there you have it. So you can be, and it occurred to me that there's a lot of Christians who would fall in that camp, who actually agree with her. And so we should talk about this idea of a pro-choice, because that's really what it comes down to. It's pro-choice versus pro-life. But the pro-choice argument vests full authority in a woman. And so there's an assumption there. Why does that matter more than anything else? Why does that choice to terminate a pregnancy matter more than anything else? Because at face value, it seems like you got a bunch of draconian people who are trying to impose their will on a woman simply because she wants to make a health decision. That's the way it's thrown out there. But is that really what's going on?
Well, I'm fascinated from a couple of things, so bear with me because I'm gonna have a thought dump. Number one, let's dissect. Is the decision abortion, is it really about a woman's body? Let's talk about that, number one. Number two, as a Christian, because now we're talking to Christians, does God have an opinion about what we do with our bodies? We're getting into 1 Corinthians 6:19, right? Our bodies are not our own. We're the temple of the Holy Spirit. So let's talk about that. I mean, again, we're a Christian apologetics podcast. And then number three, does society hold other ideologies to that same standard? Because last time I checked, Sharia law has women just showing their eyeballs, barely looking. Can't do this, can't do that, mutilating clitorises because they're not supposed, Sharia, and we can talk about that. We've dissected that in the show before, what you can and can't do with your body. So, so there's a societal hypocrisy that we have to look at, and people are noticing it now. Even people like Joe Rogan, it says, look, there's no worldview criticized like the Christian worldview, and the standards aren't held the same. That's my third bucket. So number one, is it biologically a woman's body? I mean, I'll be an ignorant interview for a second. I have an opinion about it, and if I'm wrong, we can disagree or agree, or someone can disagree. Number two, does God have an opinion about what all of us do with our bodies, men included, by the way? And then number three, is this same standard applied everywhere? I mean, is the same outrage that people have about what people are supposed to do or not do with their bodies, whether you mandate vaccines, whether you do whatever you want to do, my body, my choice, and is that consistently applied around? So for me, and if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong biologically, you correct me. By definition, a baby growing inside of a woman's body is not truly her body. Am I wrong by saying that, or is that biologically accurate or not accurate?
From the moment of conception, the biology says that it states, and we've had, there's been tons of embryology textbooks. We've had from scientific textbooks to expert testimony at Senate Judiciary Committee. This has been the case for hundreds of years. The prevailing opinion, scientifically and otherwise, is that life begins at conception, where conception is the fusing of a sperm male cell with a female oocyte, an egg cell. And at that fusion, you have what's called a zygote, which is a fertilized egg. So conception means fertilization. So life begins at fertilization. And the reason that is true genetically is because at that very moment, a distinct genetic being is created. And so that entity, that fertilized egg, that zygote, has its own chromosomal structure. It has its own genetic distinction from the mother and the father. In fact, when you have fertilization, the sperm cell ceases to exist, and the female egg cell, the oocyte, ceases to exist, and literally fuses together into a genetically distinct. So it is false to say that somehow this is an extension of the female body. It's just patently biologically and otherwise false.
So it's its own entity.
It is distinct.
Then
It is simply, Nico, it's not a distinct in the sense that it's a different type or a different entity. It's human. It's just at obviously a earlier developmental stage.
So is it inside of a woman's body as a surrogate, or is it, because when they say what a woman can do with her body, I guess what I'm asking is, what is it biologically considered a woman's body, or is she a surrogate to another entity in her body?
Well, in the early stages, the fertilized egg, the fetus, the unborn, the baby. And I always say, if they want it, it's a baby. If they don't, it's a fetus. But that's the language. It always shapeshifts depending on where the woman. That's why I said it comes back to the language is centered around this notion of that the woman gets to choose. And you can hear it in the language. If the woman wants to keep it, then literally the entity changes and it becomes a baby. If she doesn't want to keep it, it's a fetus. Okay. But let's call it a fetus for the sake of argument.
Well, what does fetus mean in Latin?
Go ahead.
Small child. Sorry.
But see, the point is that there's a symbiotic relationship in the sense that it's benefiting from the alimentary canals. When a woman eats, that's how it gets fed. A woman eats something, it nourishes, and so it goes through the alimentary canal and it feeds the baby. So the question then becomes, and so you could say, well, that's my body. No, it's not your body. There's a body inside your body.
That's my point I was trying to make.
There is a body inside your body that's in an earlier developmental stage. But it's not accurate to say that's my body. It actually is not fundamentally.
I wasn't trying to take a hard, steady position on it until I asked you.
Well, terms matter, so it's good that we're.
Well, that's why I'm asking you, because it seems to track the mindset or the concept that the Penal Code has. And I bring this up all the time, and I'm not even talking my faith yet. No. The Penal Code says that if you murder a pregnant woman, you are charged with capital murder. And when I always ask that question, people say, oh, because you killed two people? Because that's one of the reasons why you could face the death penalty and capital murder. If during the same incident you murdered two people during the same course and conduct. But I said that's fine. That doesn't hurt the argument to protect the child. But that's not what the Penal Code says. Okay. The Penal Code says you've murdered a child under 10 years old. So my point is, the Penal Code, not just the biology book, not the Bible, not whatever. The Penal Code, Texas Penal Code, says that an individual has been accused of murdering a child under 10 years old. And whether it's 9, 8, 7, 6 on outside or all the way into the womb, the Texas Penal Code, number one, acknowledges a child, not a fetus, not a clump of cells inside of a woman's womb, right, and protects it. Okay. And under the capital murder statute, you carve out exception, medical advisor or doctor essentially acting on the direction of the mom. Now that doesn't change the concept that that's a child in there, except they just carve out an exception for abortion, and that they protect the child in every other circumstance except with the mom's choice and a doctor acting upon the mom's choice. Yes. And I ask questions to people that
no, this is I think you're touching on the crux of the argument.
I'm just trying to ask. I want the logic. I want the logic. That's all.
Well, the logic is inconsistent. That's why you're pointing it out. You want the logic, and you're starving for the logic because the logic isn't there. You've got the Penal Code, which is actually based in reality, in objective biological reality. And then you have literally going back to Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. There were two parallel cases, as you know, in 1973 that had parallel rulings. And it came down on this notion of the right to privacy because the court straddled this issue of the humanity of the fetus. That's the problem. People talk about everything. I mean, they're literally at each other's throats, but they won't talk about the very issue we need to talk about, which is, I think, what we're talking about right now. And that's the notion that this is a human being. It's just a human being that is in its earliest developmental stages.
Right.
You went through it. I went through it. Every human being went through it. So we need to take the conversation back there. And you're finding this dissonance because the courts called it a potential human life. And because it called it a potential human life, then it said that the privacy of the woman prevailed against every single state's right to regulate abortion. Because at that point, if you decide that it's not a human, it makes it subjective versus an objective reality, which is what you started this conversation with. If it's an objective reality, it's not about the right to privacy because I can't privately murder somebody. Can I? I don't think so.
No.
Okay, just making sure.
You can.
There's one lawyer here and it ain't me. That's why I asked. So you're right, without consequences.
Yeah.
So the point is, the court said, if at any time the personhood of the unborn is established, then the appellant's case completely collapses because now that unborn life is protected under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. So this whole and so now I think what we have now is views. The pro-life says this is a human being. The pro-choice says no, it's subhuman. But in the middle, you have a penal code that kind of tries to do this in the court of law, but written code, it's clearly a life. It's clearly a human being. So you're seeing all this dissonance, and you, I'm sure as an attorney, says, what do we do? How do we go forward? We got to get back to basics, which is the irrefutable basics, biologically and otherwise. It's a child. It's a human being. It's obvious. So what's the deal here? What's at issue? We got to get back to that. Until we continue talking about this as a human being, I think all we're going to be doing is raising the temperature. We're not going to solve a damn thing. We got to get back to, okay, why is this a human being? And you just established it. We just established it in the first 5 minutes. And we can go back hundreds of years, and there's textbooks, and there's law from the American Medical Association. I mentioned the U.S. Senate Subcommittee, Judiciary Committee in 1981 that had a bunch of expert testimony on this very issue, and they concluded, I was trying to find it, I only got a portion of it, quote, the subcommittee report in 1981 said, physicians, biologists, and other scientists agree that conception marks the beginning of the life of a human being, a being that is alive and is a member of the human species. There is overwhelming agreement on this point in countless medical, biological, and scientific writings. And that's right out of the 97th Congress, the first session in 1981.
So I want to put an earmark on viability, okay? Just because that's always the counter argument, right? So viability, we'll talk about that. Number two, but before that, I didn't want to interrupt your point, but I've never seen or even heard of people that advocate for a a pro-choice position. None of them are trying to change penal codes around the country. None of them. None of them are making the argument that change the penal code. Don't subject somebody to capital murder, the most extreme remedy in our justice system, which is to take the life of the accused. Don't change that. They shouldn't be subjected to capital murder because they have not murdered a child under 10. I don't know anyone championing the change of the penal codes, and so that's logically inconsistent to me. Number one, and no one's giving me a good answer for that.
I have what I think is an answer based on what they've done with Roe. I think you start changing the cultural perception of what life actually is, what human actually is. You spend enough time doing that, and eventually you build in a new normal, as you always call it. And I think eventually that penal code, it's just a matter of time. That penal code will, if the culture, if Dobbs had gone the other way, and we had yet another Supreme Court.
So you think that they'll change the penal code to not?
I think it's an eventuality. If the notion that we are dealing with a subhuman in the womb, then I think eventually.
But I don't even think they make that argument anymore. More and more people just say.
Well, that is actually the argument at the crux of the pro-life.
No, but they're saying it's a human, but the woman's rights trump the child at that age or at that stage because it's not real to them. It's not a baby outside the womb. And the argument, I think the argument that they've accepted, because I've heard it, I've had to field it.
But listen to the dissonance in what Nico just said.
Yeah.
Listen to that.
Yeah.
Well, they're saying, exactly, they're
Yes,
saying.
I agree.
I totally agree. So, but I mean, if you deal with, and you just said, the penal code isn't that unclear. I mean, if it's life, it's protected by the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Right. So this is what I mean, we gotta establish that this is in fact a human being with personhood. And if we can establish that, then they can't just say.
Well, define personhood then, I guess.
A person, a human person, a biologically distinct, rationally thinking, or a rationally capable.
But the argument
individual in the
is
earliest
viability. That at the point, because I've had people that are not for abortions, all the way up.
Yeah,
to
that's
due
the
date.
potential human being category. Yeah, and I think that's right. So I think
they're saying as long as they think, I think the 4-month argument is they make.
Yeah, which
the traditional,
depending on which demographic you talk about, this is what I mean. I mean, it got dizzying. Didn't a few months ago, 16 weeks, 20 weeks, 5 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 weeks. It's like, geez, man. And so you literally have this smorgasbord of abortion policy across all 50 states because people are wrestling with this issue, which is why Trump's position, in terms of the Republican platform, Trump's position is this is such a intense, very personal, and unsettled in terms of the debates that people are having politically. It really needs to go back to the states. The states are having enough trouble with this. We've spent 50 years confusing people, calling this a potential human life when they know full well if it's not human, what the hell is it? Everybody knows. Trump said, let's take this to the states and let's have those debates, which is what the states are built for. Let's have those debates and let's get that argued there. We're not going to solve this at the national level because this is so intense. But I would argue, and it's happening right now, that these are the kinds of discussions that you're having in the legislatures. It's coming down, pro-life arguments like Susan B. Anthony, FamilyResearchCouncil.org. They're vesting all their arguments and they're well armed with the biology, with the philosophy to say, if this is a human being, and I love it, they're forcing the argument. Please tell me what else this is. Really capable lawyers saying, if this is a human being, please tell me why this is not life protected under the 14th Amendment. And you can literally, you can hear a pin drop. And we just have to continue to do that, Nico. I don't know how this ever goes away. Yeah. And Christians are equally as confused.
But they don't know how to handle the argument well. Politicians don't. And they're arguing, well, you're just pro-birth, you're not pro-life. That's a separate argument. Now it's a strong
What do you think
argument.
that means?
Do you think Christians make that argument?
Yeah, I don't know if Christians make that argument, but what the people say when you say you're pro-birth versus pro-life, that means that you want to save the child, but you don't give a shit about the kid as he grows.
Nico and I have been in text streams where somebody has actually said that,
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I have a similar criticism, but that doesn't mean that I'm okay with pro-choice. You don't say, well, you're shitty at pro-life, meaning really pro-life. Okay, so therefore what? So let's get better at being pro-life.
So it's okay to wipe out a baby in the womb.
Let's work on the redemptive side of people. I believe in redemption. Our justice system has a redemptive aspect to it. I believe that Jesus can change anything and anybody, and can change people's lives. So I agree. The church, i.e., people that are pro, maybe not just the church, conservatives, whatever, that are pro-life, that don't just be saving the child, save the man or the woman, save the human being.
Sure, totally.
Work on. That's what the Christian should be worried about.
Which is a legitimate separate argument.
It's a separate argument. Yeah. You don't say you're shitty at that, so let's just allow the child to be terminated. Well, no. Let's work on both. We're better at this than that one, maybe, arguably. Well, then let's work on this. You don't just say let the child be terminated.
Right. My mother, actually, when she was 16, had a child out of wedlock, and she was pressured in the 70s to have an abortion. And what changed her mind to keep the child and give it up for adoption was listening to a sermon by Tommy Barnett. He gave a pro-life position from the pulpit on the stage, and it really compelled her to say, no, I'm not going to kill this child. I'm going to have this child. She gave it up for adoption. This would have been in the 70s. And I know there's no such thing as a perfect solution, but I don't think we need to double down and make the situation worse with ending the life of the child. Well, even if an adoption system isn't perfect, even if all this stuff has problems, I still think it's a million times
There's a lot of people in the church that would adopt children. Yeah. I mean, Davi and I are open for adoption. Yeah. I've said that before. I'm hesitant to go through the adoption process and through these agencies. and it's but there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of families that would through a church of organization adopt. There's no doubt about that.
More churches need to do that.
Yeah. So the viability questions. Let's go talk about that, because the argument is this child is not viable. It cannot survive outside the mom's womb.
I want to go to the argument behind that argument and why I think there's, and I just threw out, I was on the road and, Jeff was like, we need a title. And I was like, oh, okay. And what do I do? And I don't know, you were probably tied up at the time, but I threw out, I did sort of a diarrhea dump, just basic verses that came to mind on why I think there's a whole Christian apologetic on why the Bible is literally silent on this issue. In other words, that the Bible permits or makes room for the notion that we don't even have a human being in there until birth.
People make that argument biblically?
and that
are these the passages?
And that underlies what you're talking about, which is, okay, well, are we really going to have this question about viability? It's another way of saying viability. If you read Genesis 2:7, and I just gave those verses. It's just 6 or 7 different examples, Nico, of the same argument, which I think is a poor argument, but I'm telling you, it speaks to this issue of viability. It's misguided. Just read Genesis 2:7 and let's look at it for a moment.
Then the Lord, Genesis 2, is this on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
For them too, for the viewers?
Yep.
Oh, good. Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature.
So Genesis 2:7, you have this first human becomes a living being, and only after that God give him life.
Only after they breathed on their own?
So that, now you see where we're going.
Yeah.
So since breathing doesn't occur until birth, it's argued that the unborn are not human until after birth. And so this spirit, life, breath thing continues. And if you go to the next one, it's the exact same thread of rationale. Go to Job 34, 14 to 15. There actually are Christian apologetics on this, and it's quite maddening. Just read that.
If he should set his heart to it and gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust.
So think about that. God, this idea that if God withdrew his spirit and breath, that all humankind would perish. You can see that connection again, that since life is connected with breath, it's reason that there's no human life before breath. And of course, there's no breath until birth. So go to the next one. It's the same thread.
Isaiah
57:16.
For I will not contend forever, nor will I always be angry. For the spirit would grow faint before me, and the breath of life that I made.
So there again, there's this sort of breath of man or mankind. It's interchangeable, the text.
Did you want Isaiah 57:16?
Isaiah 57:16.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just look at the connection, the inferred connection here.
But back to
there's
breath of life.
the breath of human that I have created as God. So in 16, it seems to be making again this sort of breath is the point of the human being's creation. That's the Genesis, breath. And in Ecclesiastes 6:3-5 does the exact. It gets a little more graphic because he talks about a stillborn child, Nico. Go to Ecclesiastes. Go ahead. Go to Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verses 3-5. This one I think is rather fascinating to me. But read it.
Go ahead, Nico.
If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he.
So think about this notion of this stillborn child. So a stillborn child comes into the world, it has no meaning, and then it departs in darkness. It departs in darkness, and it never saw the sun, it never knew anything. And so what's the connection there? I mean, the unborn basically are no more than the dead.
Wait, what's the contrast between the father?
Forget that. I'm focusing on the stillborn. I just wanted you to have context. It's how a stillborn child is defined. It's coming into the world. It knows nothing. It doesn't see the sun. It leaves in darkness. Yeah, and it basically, the inference there in this verse it seems to me the unborn are no better than the dead. You don't know anything. You lie in the darkness of the grave. See? So
Yeah, but
that's the inference.
A baby in a woman's womb is not stillborn. I mean, if they're alive. This is talking specifically about a stillborn.
But it comes, fair enough, but it's coming into the world without meaning.
Well, I'd make
Without
the distinction
meaning
that it's a stillborn.
Okay, fair enough.
A stillborn, just for make sure I'm on the right track. A stillborn is a child that is passed on in the mommy's womb.
Yes.
And is born still.
Yeah, I'm not agreeing with it. I'm saying it's taken to mean that the unborn are no better or no more than the dead because they don't know anything. They lie in darkness.
David said.
And go to 9:10 for a moment.
After Bathsheba had a miscarriage, and I can't be with him. I'm sorry, he can't be with me, but I will be with him.
Actually, David actually makes a very potent argument on why this is nonsense, and we should talk about that because I wanted to just turn this over for argumentation here. Just one more. Go to Matthew 26. This is one of my. I told Jeff, keep your powder dry here. I don't want to get into Judas Iscariot right now, but just read Matthew 26:24.
The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for that man if he had not been born.
Right. So the inference is that human life begins when?
When he's born.
Begins at birth. I mean, otherwise Jesus would have said.
People make that argument.
Otherwise, Jesus would have said it would have been better for him never to have been conceived. See?
Well, yeah, but they didn't have that. Yeah.
So my point is, brother, this is what happens with faulty hermeneutics.
Yeah, that's weak.
All over the place, people come in with preconceived notions, and you can make the scripture say anything that you want to say. But we should look at that for a moment. There's an assumption here that is pretty flawed. The idea that you're taking breath as a kind of point. Breath is basically the point of human life's beginning. That's the argument. And is that accurate?
And how do they reconcile that with Jeremiah 1:5 and Psalm 139?
Well, yeah, I mean, exclude the other stuff, and focus on the stuff that you want, cafeteria Christianity. But I think rather than going over here, I figured we could attack the notion, the assumption here, because that's at the heart of viability. Can this child breathe on its own?
Right.
Can this child function biologically on its own? And so, I mean, for goodness sakes, there are points in the development stage where the child can't do things that it can do at a later development stage. But that's true of an 8-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 28-year-old.
Sure. But the argument is that if the child was taken out of the mommy's womb at 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, it would not have survived on its own.
Okay, yeah.
And my argument is back, a 5-month-old child and a 6-month-old child is not living on their own. They're on machines. Right. I mean, my wife was born at 6 months.
Oh, I want to continue on that. I want to continue on that analogy because, again, this speaks exactly to this issue. Because if breath is, in fact, equated with the presence of life, do you stop being human when you stop breathing? Because there are all kinds of situations where people stop breathing. Do they literally? That's insane.
I'm no longer a living being, but I'm still a person. There's a person inside of my body. Of course.
Right? I mean, the Bible's clear that human beings continue to exist, irrespective of whether they're able to breathe or not. All of that stuff has to go away. So human beings continue to exist long. I mean,
which verse do you want, Nico?
None. I was just checking on what you had up there.
And people can see that. I mean, Philippians 1:23, 2 Corinthians 5:6-8, Revelation 6:9. Human beings continue to exist long after they stop breathing. So there go those arguments. So the human life begins at the point of conception, and that is where most of the passages about the sanctity of human life, the preciousness of a child, how God looks at the unborn, that's where the inertia goes. And taking these verses out of context, all float around this notion that there is no humanity before breath.
Yeah.
And so that's where you get into viability. And this is eked into the church. And the problem is pastors don't go near it. They can't, I mean, this is not rocket science. We're just having a conversation, and people can realize you don't need a PhD in embryology to figure out. That doesn't make sense.
I mean, because the passages, I guess, that Jeremiah 1:5, Psalm 139 are clear. You know, even in Matthew, when they talk about Elizabeth and Mary, and the baby leaping in the womb.
Jeff has said about David, in sin my mother conceived me. Oh shit! Well, there goes that problem. I mean, he's actually struggling with. He already has original sin as a child. Oh shit! Okay, well that doesn't make any sense if this is a non-human being. So why is David conferring the notion of original sin while he's in the womb? It's the notion of original sin that obviously Adam and Eve, our progenitors, that they corrupted the human race, and we inherited both that corruption and that guilt.
I mean, I guess we need to identify terms and how they try to change terms. I mean, because we talked about viability. That's really, it's set up as a straw man argument, because even if the child is born at 4 months or 5 months or whatever the cutoff, that some people I have a dear friend that is pro-choice up to a certain point, like the old school, the 4 months. After that, no, you better not. That's wrong. I was like, well, who made you God? Why do you get to decide that? But there's no answer to that. But at 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a baby's going to have help breathing.
They need to be on a
They need
ventilator.
help.
Of course they
came
do.
out too soon.
They can't
but
breathe.
they're still viable. They're still on their own. I mean, so the argument, you're playing kind of twister with the logic.
It comes down to breath. It's crazy, but it distills down to breath, and humanity goes along with it. It's like you're not a human because you're not before you're born.
But what if somebody
you can't breathe?
What if somebody has pulmonary issues and you can't breathe on your own?
Oh no, this goes in all kinds of crazy clinical directions.
Guinness, right? Am I off by?
No, it's exactly. Do you stop being human when you can't breathe?
That's right.
If I'm put on a ventilator, I stop being human.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nuts.
I mean, just
but,
think of the whole
but it's
COVID
seeped
thing.
into the church, and so that's why the church says, "Oh, let's not even go down that road." I mean, why? I mean, the Bible's neutral on it. It's not neutral.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Nico, the Matthew 1:20 reference I think is meaningful. Where the angel says to Mary, what she's, I mean, pull it up. It's pretty amazing. What is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. Okay, well, what's conceived in her? A meaningless, inhuman entity. Come on.
Well, they argue. They change the terminology to reproductive rights, and my retort to that is, well, women have a right to not reproduce. The problem is when the baby's conceived, you've already reproduced. So again, I think that's I'm objectively just trying to push back on. I'm not going to give anything. You don't give anything to me. I should be able to defend every bit of my argument, logically, for me, biblically, societally, practically. But they have to also. So when they use words like reproductive rights, you do have a right not to reproduce, but you're too late. You already did now. So now what do we do? I mean, so, and then I always say by definition, even though mine was more of a practical argument, you gave the biological argument when we first opened the show. If a woman is pregnant, and my wife loved being pregnant, she just, it was a beautiful thing for her. She had rough pregnancies, but she's a trooper. She loved being pregnant. I mean, but if let's use my wife as an example, Davi. If she says, I want to stay pregnant for the rest of my life. I go, do you want to get pregnant again and again and again? No, I want to stay pregnant. Mm-hmm. No matter what any woman wants, after 9 months, that baby's coming out. So by a practical definition, maybe not biological, maybe it is. I mean, I don't know. I'll let you decide that one. But by a practical definition, that's not your body. Your arm, your ear, your legs, your breasts, your nose, that's your body. Minus some tragic incident or accident, that's not going to just fall off your body. This baby's coming out. You cannot stay pregnant for as long as you want to. That baby's coming out.
It is.
I've had many cases where people have babies in bathrooms and bus stops because it's coming out. They don't go to the hospital and they just leave it in the toilet or the trash can or whatever, but it came out. It's brutal. I mean, it's horrible. So, and the same people are okay with prosecuting that woman. But it's logically inconsistent to me.
Sure.
And I just ask simple questions. I'm not trying to just ask questions. This is not a soundbite discussion.
That's a great point.
This is not a soundbite issue. And people want to distill it down to soundbites. Reproductive rights. My body, my choice. Don't tell the woman what you can do. But it's not that simple. I mean, the penal code tells you what you can and can't do with your own body. I mean, you can't kill somebody. You can't have someone kill somebody. So I mean, and of course for Christians, God has a say so in what we do with our bodies. Yeah. And so I'm really trying. I really try to be objective and listen very carefully to the logic behind the argument. And I think every one of them has fallen short.
Truly, and I mean, and we haven't even exhausted the biological arguments. I mean, we've talked about blood type. Obviously their own unique blood type, their own unique sex. Mm-hmm. So it's an extension of my body, but that's a male. What if they have A woman has a baby boy. Obviously, it's not an extension of her body. It's a male. She's a female. So the sex is different. And then the blood type is, I think, a big deal. I mean, the entire genetic footprint.
That's a big one.
That's a really big deal. So I don't know. I think if you just go one by one, but we have, we're doing what nobody wants to do. Pastors aren't engaging on this. Generally speaking, they're not engaging on it. Even the Republican Party's not engaging on it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
it's sad.
It's okay to punt it to the states because of separation of powers. I get it. We have state legislatures. These are serious issues that need to be hashed in communities. Fair enough. But to not talking about it at all on a national stage, it's foolish. I think it's foolish.
These are long form discussions.
They are.
And the problem is there's no soundbite way to defend it. That's the disadvantage when you get into this debate with people. There's a soundbite way to advocate for pro-choice. When you really break it down,
but there's been some effective, like even on the argument of what's a woman. I mean, people look ridiculous. Is that a woman? I mean, literally, you've had people in Biden's cabinet, for instance. You've had pretty high officials in government been asked, "Is this a woman?" In congressional hearings, "Is this a woman?" And they're deer in headlights. Those are moments that I think expose a radicalism and a complete loss of ability to think rationally. 99% of Americans aren't there. They're like, this is craziness. I think we do the same with regard to humanity. Are you saying this is not a human being? Trump went everywhere he shouldn't have gone, in my view, without getting into particulars on abortion. Missed opportunity. I mean, they're sort of talking about it. She made it about a woman's choice. Yeah. So it's fair enough to say, I just want to make sure I understand. Is this a human being or is not? There's got to be a way to bring it back to whether, because that's where most Americans are. That's a human being. So you're saying that a person can wipe out another person.
But see, the thing, I think for most people, George, they have to play mind games with themselves.
They redefine terms.
And well, it's not just that, but they don't get to see it. So Dabi went to school in Mexico. And she went to a Catholic school, and they actually showed them an animated video of what an abortion is. And it freaked them out. I was like, what? I mean, most people don't visualize it, that you're literally dismembering a child.
Yeah.
It's not you take a pill and then it goes to bed. It's not anesthesia. It's not like that. They're either sticking a needle in and puncturing the heart or the brain or the skull or they're pulling the child apart. And the example that I give people is we kind of la because the baby can't speak. So to me, it's like a special needs child that can't defend themselves. Even though I'm not saying that every child in the womb is special needs, I'm just saying the ability to communicate at that stage of their development. And I always hearken back to this horrible case of the one that I always bring up, Andrea Yates out of Houston. I think she was out of Houston. Just an evil bitch that murdered 4 or 5 of her sons.
That's a horrific story.
It's a horrific story. But and she drowned them. She drowned the children, and this is for me. Not even forget about being a Christian for a second. For me, logically, if the child could talk in the mommy's womb, if we had a way to let the child speak for themselves, I believe truly that they will say what that little 5-year-old of Andrea Yates said before she murdered him. She had murdered 2 or 3 of her children. She gets the 5-year-old. And they said he was a scrappy little kid. And so as she's drowning him, he's pushing back and fighting her, whether she was tired at that time or not. And he looked up at her and said, "I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry." And then she drowned him, apologizing for, what did I do for my mommy to do this to me? And so in my mind, it's very clear to me that if the child in the womb could talk, again, I'm not talking as a Christian, would the child say, "Whoa, before the clamp, what are you doing? Mommy, I'm sorry, but I didn't want you. Well, I'm sorry, Mommy, what did I do? But I was this. But Mommy, what did I do?" How does it change the child's position and their stance? And would the child say, "I'm sorry, Mommy, I'm sorry," and then you take off? I mean, I don't understand. I mean, I don't understand how most people just don't even know what an abortion entails. It's not a pill. The baby comes up. I mean, they either fry the baby or they pull the baby apart or they puncture something.
These visuals are very powerful. They really are. I mean, ultrasounds, technology has really helped people to see these cases, help people to really get back in touch with the humanity of a child. And I think we got to continue to get back to these kinds of conversations. And until we do, I think I'm telling you, people are just going to be at each other's throats. We're not going to get anywhere.
But George, what will you say? What will the Christian say? What will the pastor say when he stands before the Lord and he says, "What did you do to advocate what I wanted to advocate? What did you do with the responsibility of being a shepherd of this flock? What did you do with what you clearly knew I expected of you?" I mean, where's reverence? Where's a healthy fear of the Lord?
That's right.
Where is it? I mean, what are you going to say? Oh, come on. It wasn't that bad. What do you mean it wasn't that bad? There's not a lot of things God says in his word that he hates. There's just not a lot. We know there's 6 of them, and then there's a 7th thing that he really, really doesn't like, he detests. But one of the 6 is the spilling of innocent blood. It's not the spilling of blood. Ecclesiastes 3 says there's a time for everything under the sun, including a time to kill, but never a time to murder, never a time to spill innocent blood. So going back to your point, George, if we get back to the humanity of a child, if the Christian can understand that God looks at that child as valuable and as a person that has personhood and that has the right to live, and God intends them to live, how do you justify it? That is the spilling by definition.
I think that's right.
And the penal code reflects it.
And the court acknowledged that in Roe v. Wade. It's etched in there that the whole thing collapses. This whole notion of choice, this whole notion of right to privacy, the whole thing goes away. But I think that's right. Last time we brought up the example, as you were talking, I thought so distinct from a mother's womb is that baby, that if you take a fertilized egg from a black couple and you place it in the womb of a white mother, it'll be a black baby. So distinct.
That's a great one. I haven't heard you say that one before.
Oh,
that's a good one.
I thought we had mentioned it last time, but it bears mentioning again.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's how distinct. That's how absolutely distinct. And so we got.
If you take the what of a black couple?
If you take a fertilized egg
there you go.
from a black couple and you put it in the womb of a white mother,
surrogate,
it'll be a black baby. Why is that? So distinct.
Yeah, that's great.
So distinct is that child from the womb.
That's a great one.
And that matters.
Look, I mean, the bottom line is now there needs to be wisdom in how it's advocated.
Human beings are exceptional.
Yeah.
They're worth protecting at every stage in their development.
But as a Christ follower, if Jesus is my Lord, then he gets to decide how I live my life. And as my Lord, I want to love what he loves. I want to hate what he hates. And I'm going to hold sacred what he holds sacred. And he holds life sacred, so sacred that he left the throne of heaven, bankrupted heaven, and then put himself on a cross naked for us, for every one of us, to include the creation that he distinctly distinguishes in a mommy's womb. And that's why he says in Jeremiah 5 that I knew you in your mommy's womb. In Psalm 139, I knit you together. You were woven together. And if you look, it's fascinating to me that you look at the DNA. What do you call it?
Molecule?
No, what is it called? The chain or whatever. It looks
double helix.
Yeah, it looks woven together.
Yes.
I mean, interesting verbiage, but it sure looks woven together to me.
You're talking about the double helix structure of the DNA.
Yeah, the double helix.
molecule.
But is it called? Was it called the DNA helix? Is that what I would
It's a
call
double helix.
Double helix. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a scripture where it says that it pleased God to crush his son, and Jesus' innocent blood was spilled or shed on our behalf, and for our redemption. And Jesus clearly, like George was saying a moment ago, was born through a human process, lived a human life, and died and suffered a human death. And because Jesus is the qualified substitute, the only one that can stand as a substitute, then
Isaiah 53:5-10, it pleased God to bruise him.
Yes.
What, Isaiah what?
53:10, what Jeff is quoting, but
Yes.
it's Isaiah 53:5-10.
But people always bastardize that too. It didn't please him like he's some weird.
Not like he's happy.
Yeah. Like he's like, oh, I'm so happy my son is getting beat up.
Yeah, because he saw the good.
Right. Obviously, it's hard to translate that word.
He saw the good in that suffering would bring to humanity, to liberate humanity from sin.
I think I heard someone said that a word is he appreciated the fact. Versus please. Please, like, haha, I'm so happy about it.
Yeah.
When they say that God is a jealous God, he's not jealous in that sense. He just wants our attention. And then he says, I'm not going to keep it to myself. I want you to out. I'm just going to filter your love, because your love sucks if it's on your own. Let it filter through me, and then take it out to the world.
I think that's why context matters.
Yeah.
You can't take that verse by itself. Read it within that unit of context, because you'll see that he's delighted or he's pleased in the outcome of what this ultimately is going to mean, which is the liberation of man from sin. But the Bible seems to be overwhelming with the notion that human life doesn't really begin at birth. There's an eternality to human beings, an exceptional nature to human beings, and that birth is simply the beginning of the emergence of natural life, the human debut, if you will, because we are in fact eternal beings. So we got to get back to the exceptional nature of humanity as God sees it, and then we can also we've done it. We've had seminars where we've talked about the exceptional nature of human beings biologically, and really diverging from this evolutionary view of human beings. Got to get back to it, but I illiteracy doesn't help.
Yeah.
Biblical literacy doesn't help.
And then cowardice doesn't help either, because if pastors don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, you can be literate all you want if you're a coward.
But you got to be able to be bold and just be able to have conversation.
Just
have conversation.
For taking in the babies or something. I don't know. Churches need to do more.
Well, yeah, but just start with educating the flock, first of all. Well, guys, look, we made up our time. Sorry if it was late. It's our fault. Thank you for joining us. Share this episode with someone you think they may benefit from it, and text, post some ideas of topics you want us to cover. I promise you, we're going to get to our pastors series. We just have to call pastors we want to have on, schedule them so we can be ahead of time. And then we want to talk about their journey, where they think the state of the church is today in this political season. I think it's interesting to hear other pastors' views on it as well, and what they're dealing with in their circles, and their congregations, and their journey, and where they at in their boldness, or what they want to preach, and what they think the Bible is, God expects of them through God's word. So all that I would think will be helpful for us. But thank you. Have a blessed week. I guess week's almost over. Weekend, and hope you'll join in next week.
Check out Sidebar.
Check out Sidebar.